Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a chilling first part of an incredible series by our good friend CarlB1961 over on Reddit, No Sleep. Quick forewarning here, guys, for any of those that are sensitive to stronger subject matters, and this one's certainly not for the little dogmen listening. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. Why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled, I'm trapped in my house. Something is in here with me. I think I'm in hell. Part 1. Let's get straight into that. A hand shaking my shoulder awakened me. I stirred, groaning, as consciousness returned to me. I opened my eyes, blinking them to clear them. My wife, Kate, was standing over me. I saw her face, the troubled expression on it, the frightened look in her eyes, and my head cleared. Instantly, I was wide awake and alert. I glanced quickly around the bedroom. It was dark outside the windows, still night. I glanced at the alarm clock beside the bed. 10:13. Something about that bothered me. Something about it was wrong. But I let it go for the time being, more concerned about my wife's distressed appearance. "What is it?" I asked. She just stared at me for a moment, opened her mouth to speak, and then closed it abruptly, as if she didn't even know how to put whatever was wrong into words. I felt alarm course through me. She wasn't just troubled, she was downright disturbed. And it wasn't just the fear in her eyes, it was the damn near pure terror. "What is it?" I asked her again, more urgently this time, thinking it must be a phone call she received. Phone calls in the dead of the night are never good news, or some kind of emergency. A fire maybe, or burglars, or... "Something is seriously wrong, Nick," she said in a quiet voice, almost a whisper. "What? What's happening?" "It's still dark outside," she replied. "Yeah, so it's the middle of the night. What do you expect?" I was a tad annoyed at her for pointing out such an obvious fact. It's probably one of the few truly dumb things I'd ever heard Kate, who is fairly level-headed and an intelligent woman, say. But something about the alarm clock was still bothering me. A realization was already starting to gel in my subconscious. "Jesus, Nick!" she exclaimed, and now she was the one who sounded annoyed, even though there was a note of panic in her tone as well. "Don't you get it? It's after 10 in the morning and it's still dark outside." It hit me right then like a blow from a sledgehammer, and I felt like an idiot. It should have been obvious, but then my brain was slowed down a little by the 4 or 5 beers I had the night before going to bed. I had been drinking because it was Friday night and I was off the next day. And of course I hadn't gone to bed until late, long after Kate had gone to sleep. I remember the time I had seen on the clock over the TV as I glanced at it on my way to bed. More than a bit drunk, but still fairly lucid. 1:03 a.m. I had gone to bed well after midnight on a Saturday morning. This morning. And it was 10:13 a.m., not p.m. "What the fuck?" I muttered incredulous and looked again out the window at the blackness beyond. I looked back at Kate. "Are you sure?" I asked her dumbly, not knowing what else to say. "Yes, I'm sure," she said with an edge of hysteria. "Look!" She thrust the phone impatiently at me, and I looked at the time and date on the screen. 10:14 a.m., Saturday, April 4th. I looked at her, starting to become scared of myself. I found myself hoping this was just some kind of joke, a belated April Fool's Day prank. I looked at her, hoping she was going to crack a smile or breaking down into laughter, saying she had got me good, but I could see that she was not faking her fear and desperation. They were genuine. I swiftly got out of bed in my boxers and t-shirt and hastily got dressed, putting on the pants I had worn the previous evening. "Are Chris and the others up?" I asked her. "Yes, they're downstairs." My older brother Chris and his wife Annie and the 10-year-old stepson Adam had been staying with us at our house for the past 3 weeks, since Chris had been laid off from his job as a truck driver last month. It wasn't an ideal living situation for any of us, but Chris was family and our parents were dead, so there really wasn't anyone else they could turn to. It's not like we could just say no and turn him and a kid onto the street. Chris and Annie stayed in the downstairs guest room, and I had set up a makeshift bedroom in the basement for Adam. Dressed, I headed out of the bedroom and marched briskly down the hallway and downstairs to the front door, Kate directly behind me. I opened the door and just stood there, staring out at what lay beyond, bewildered and scared. Beyond the doorway lay only blackness. Blackness that was blacker than black. Somehow, an inky void that seemed to blot out the world that lay beyond our house. It wasn't just nighttime darkness. If it had been, there still should have been some ambient light from the stars and moon, enough to allow me to see the front lawn and driveway and the street of our neighbours' houses on the other side. This darkness, I was wrong, was not natural, was an absolute negative of existence, and it scared me in a way I never had been before. I listened and heard nothing. Dead silence. No crickets, no dogs barking, no car engines. But I did smell something. A faint, unpleasant, musty odour that reminded me of the way the crawlspace in our parents' old house had used to smell after it flooded in a heavy rain. I looked down and saw something else that sent a chill up my spine. The light from inside the house should have been spilling out beyond the doorway onto the front porch outside, but it wasn't. The light stopped in a neat line right at the threshold. On impulse, I turned and headed for the kitchen, stepping past Kate, who called after me. "Where are you going?" And I didn't answer her. I opened a drawer in the kitchen and grabbed the 4 big battery flashlight where it lay, along with some emergency candles and a box of matches. And I returned to the open front door and clicked on the flashlight, aiming it out into the dark. The powerful beam of light did not penetrate the blackness, did not reveal what lay hidden within. It seemed to fall short, seemed to somehow be absorbed by the impenetrable, thick wall of solid darkness. And I lowered it with trembling hands. I stepped as close to the doorway as I dared, cupped my hands around my mouth and suddenly shouted at the top of my lungs, "Hello? Is anyone out there? Can you hear me?" And out the corner of my eye, I caught Kate flinching slightly at my unexpected shouting. My voice had sounded, weirdly muffled as it passed beyond the doorway. The way your voice would sound when you tried talking with your mouth pressed against a weighted-up bunch of clothing. My voice, like the light, was also being absorbed by the heavy, oppressive blackness that surrounded our house. I briefly considered stepping outside, but just the idea of taking one step over the threshold filled me with an overwhelming wave of existential, soul-crushing terror. I somehow could sense instinctively that if I went out into the darkness, I would be lost, would never return inside. I stood there, staring out into the lightless nothingness for several long moments. What the fuck is going on here? I said quietly, more to myself than my wife. "Close the door, Nick," Kate begged behind me. "Please." I did. I stepped back from the front door, my mind whirling. I couldn't make sense of what was happening, couldn't even postulate on what could be causing it. A tempting possibility occurred to me. Maybe this was just a bad dream. Only one way to be sure. I turned to Kate. "Slap me." She gave me a confused look. "What?" "Go on, do it. Slap me. Hard as you can." And she obliged. Whack. "Ow!" I cried, rubbing my cheek. Well, that answered that question. This was no dream. "What are we going to do?" she asked me. "We have to call someone. Call 911. It was the best I could come up with on such short notice. "I already tried. The phones don't work. The lines are dead." I looked at her and took out my own phone out of my pocket and tried it anyway. She was right. My call, it wouldn't go through. I grabbed the handset off its stand on the table in the foyer and tried it. Well, there was no dial tone. The landline was out too. Shit! I snapped with frustration and slammed it down. "Don't even bother trying the internet," Kate told me just as the thought crossed my mind. She sounded offended that I hadn't believed her about the phones. "I checked that myself. It's down too." "What about the TV?" I asked, certain she was going to say that wasn't working either. Instead, she did something strange. She lowered her head and shuddered slightly. "What is it?" She looked up at me, and I could see something else was bothering her. "There's something I didn't tell you." "What?" I demanded. "The TV, it still works. Sort of." "Well, thank God for that," I replied. "What are they saying?" I was no journalist, but I had a pretty good idea that the sun not rising one day would qualify as pretty fucking huge international news. I imagined it would be all they were talking about on the channels. She looked at me, struggling to find the words. I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "You don't understand, Nick. There's something wrong with the TV. All the channels, they..." And she trailed off. "I can't even explain it. You need to see for yourself." Puzzled, I followed her as she motioned me into the living room. Now Chris, a big burly guy with a goatee and a shaved head, was sitting on the couch with Annie and Adam between them. Adam looked scared and I could see tears in his eyes. Annie had her arm around his shoulders and was speaking quietly to him, reassuring him. And Chris stood up when he saw me enter. "Nick," he said in greeting, "this is some pretty fucking weird shit going down." Annie scolded him and told him to watch his language around Adam. She was a thin, quiet, pretty blonde woman in her late 20s, a decade Chris's junior. She had a slightly weary, worn, washed-out quality about her, the result of a pretty rough life, abused physically and sexually by both her drug-addicted parents. She had run away at 16 without finishing high school and hooked up with a guy who was a pretty low-life character himself. He had gotten her pregnant before running off, only to get his head blown off some time later by a shotgun-brandishing Korean convenience store owner whose business he'd been trying to hold up. She had been struggling as a single mother, working as a waitress in a truck stop diner to support Adam, where she had met Chris, who had been one of her regulars. They had only been married for about a year and a half. Sorry, babe," he replied. "Do you think you guys can go into the kitchen for a few minutes?" Kate asked the three of them. "I want to show Nick what's on TV." And they looked at her, their faces grim. "Yeah, sure, Kate," Chris said. And he whispered something to Adam, who nodded, and they stood and quietly followed Chris out of the living room. Kay went onto the TV, which I had just noticed had been turned off all of this time, and flipped it on, pointedly not looking at it. And I stared at the screen. For a moment I didn't understand what I was seeing. It was the Today Show, the 4th hour. Hoda Kotb and Jenna Bush Hager were seated in their usual places in the studio, but everything was off-kilter somehow, skewed in the most twisted of ways. The windows behind them where pedestrians outside normally gather to wade in at the audience in hope of being seen on national TV, or they were completely black, like the outside of our house. Both Hoda and Jenna had twin trails of blood running down their cheeks from their eyes like tears, and they were both smiling grotesquely, exaggerated grins that bared their teeth like grimaces of agony. And then I heard what they were saying. Hoda: "The streets are running delightfully red with the blood of transgressors who had so gleefully cavorted and fornicated in the excesses of their own shallow, stupid gluttony and sense of righteous piety and want. There are trees that weep and the rocks that whisper the hungry secrets of mankind's most insipid desires. that glean to behold the call of virtue in the face of their own hypocritical lust for higher knowledge of wealth and NASA's top-secret missions to hide Starbucks enemas in the school lunches of America's less privileged elementary school students. Crass commercialism and the brainwashing of the impressionable minds that strive to reach a transcendental state of perfect awareness so that we can all stop fucking our dead grandmothers and stuffing our faces with Fritos, and watching return of happy days long enough to hear the true calling of this greater voice that beckons us, that tells us that we too can one day own a Tesla of our very own. Well, the audience clapped and laughed uproariously at this gibberish. I watched, dumbstruck with shock. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing. And Jenna, that's so very becoming, Hoda, because I too see the floating dead corpses of the aborted fetuses in the shallow streams of pollution from the nuclear power plants that so gloriously stand as idols to humanity's impudent conquest of the natural chaos that dictates the universe. The cold, crushing vacuum of space in which we, meaningless, trivial insects we are, float on an insignificant speck of dust amidst the cosmos. Eat Big Macs, but seriously, Hoda, seriously, it is a very good day. A very golden day. A day for going down to the beach with that girl you kidnapped from the parking lot of Dunkin' Donuts and have been keeping prisoner in the basement of your fucking cum slut of a mother who was too busy snorting meth and having a train run on her by the 20 Klansmen she met while donating blood at Bed Bath & Beyond, and secretly planned to poison the water supply of Peru to realize what a twisted fucking freak her bastard offspring of a son is, and have been using as a sex slave and going down to the beach littered with the countless bones of the martyrs who died worthlessly so that we can all gorge ourselves upon the flesh of unborn children grouped up and processed into Happy Meals, and the ocean red with blood of the billions who suffer for our wanton need to dance and masturbate while watching snuff films and listening to Lady Gaga. A good day for going down to the beach and committing group suicide. Hell yeah. Out with the old and in with the blue. Another eruption of applause and laughter from the audience. Hoda. But seriously, Jenna, seriously, these are great times we are living in. The best of times, the cursed of times, the end of times. Time to wash your car and clean your hair and put the barrels of that shotgun in your mouth like you've been looking forward to doing all year long since you caught your wife in bed with Charles Manson and they force-fed you the liver of your 5-year-old son before sodomizing you with his severed foot and making you lick it clean out of your own shit, and then closing your eyes and pulling the trigger and blasting off, away from the shit planet of pain and suffering, and endless Marvel comic book feature film adaptation spin-offs, and blasting off into the great unknown. Taste the rainbow. Snap into a Slim Jim. Pop culture and Pop Tarts and popcorn, and pop goes the weasel. Popping fresh, pop, 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 pop. And Jenna. And now Al's going to give us the weather. The camera cut to Al Roker standing beside his weather map, but instead of a green screen with the US outlined on it and a map of the weather patterns across the country and with the highs and lows, it showed only black and white Holocaust footage, emaciated Jewish concentration camp prisoners and mass graves and piles of dead bodies, and the Nazis performing executions. Unlike Jenna and Hoda, Al Roker was not smiling. His face was a rictus of horror, his eyes wide and blank and vacant. His eyes were also leaking blood down his cheeks, and he gestured to the screen as he spoke in a calm, mellow voice. You got it, Jenna. As you can see here, today's going to be a wonderful day for rape and torture, subjugation, a wonderful day for castration, mutilation and flagellation, asphyxiation, celebration, masturbation and self-immolation, accusation, A wonderful day for drinking a bottle of drain cleaner while listening to the Beatles singing All You Need Is Love, while the kids drill your brains out with the cordless Black & Decker they got you for Christmas after setting a homeless man on fire. A wonderful day for an exorcism or two. A wonderful day for witch burning. A wonderful. I couldn't stand to listen to any more. I grabbed the remote and pushed the mute button. I felt dizzy, numb, unreal. I tried to comprehend the insanity I had just witnessed on the TV. "Nick?" Kate asked me, her voice low and scared. What's happening here?" I looked at her. I shook my head helplessly. "I don't know," I told her. I am trapped in my house, and something is in here with me. I think I'm in hell. Part 2. Let's get straight into that. I turned back to the TV, unmuted it and began changing channels. All the news channels were the same. CNN, MSNBC. God, help me. I even checked Fox News. All the pundits and newscasters had bleeding eyes and were all spouting the same nonsensical and disturbing, vaguely apocalyptic world salad. Trump himself was speaking at a news conference. "My fellow Americans, cannibalism is a necessary step we must all partake in as we shuffle orgasmically to the vibrations of the corrupt hearts of a dying tambourine. We are all ants, blind to our own pointless insapience as we crawl through our own laughing waste." I checked the rest of the channels in our satellite package. They were the same, and in some cases, even worse. On the Food Network, a popular cooking show host was showing us the best way to marinate what was clearly a human foot and leg severed just below the knee. On Cartoon Network, SpongeBob and Patrick performed harakiri together in a gruesomely realistic detail, both of them laughing gleefully as they did so. An episode of Everybody Loves Raymond more resembled a scene from a film, Event Horizon, than a sitcom. The cast engaged in a little orgy of sex and mutilation. The audience's canned laughter still playing over the carnage, making it all the more horrific. I flipped over to the Discovery Channel and thought for a moment I was watching a film adaptation of a Lovecraft story, with extremely impressive special effects. When I realized I wasn't watching a movie, the unspeakable creatures I beheld were real, I quickly turned to the channel, shaking a little. Jeopardy! I still had Alex Trebek and the same familiar set, but instead of podiums, there were 3 contestants. They were each bound to an X-shaped cross with a long table in front of them, laid out with a wide array of primitive torture implements that looked like they belonged in the Spanish Inquisition. They all looked terrified. "I'll take the victims of famous serial killers for 200, Alex." A young man bound to the middle cross shouted hysterically. "Linda Ann Healy, Brenda Carroll Ball, and Laura Ann Amy were all victims of this famous serial killer," Trebek stated. "Who is John Wayne Gracie?" the young man screamed his answer. "No, I'm sorry. The answer was Ted Bundy. And you wagered your right eye." Trebek nodded to someone off camera, and a voluptuous half-naked woman wearing a leather hood walked out onto stage and selected a pair of iron tongs with sharp points from the table. She closed in on the terrified young man, raising the tongs. He began to thrash around and scream as they drew closer to his eye. I changed the channel, feeling sick. The movie channels were no better. The Godfather was playing on Showtime. I came in on the scene where Michael Corleone returns home and reunites with Kay Adams after having fled to Sicily. It was still Al Pacino and Diane Keaton. At least part of her, anyway. "Now who's being naive, Kay?" Michael says, looking into the dead glazed eyes of Kay's severed head that he's holding in his hands. and then he undoes the fly on his pants with one hand while holding the severed head in the other, lowers the head's mouth to... well, I think you get the picture. Groundhog Day was just a close-up of Bill Murray's distorted face and with a red filter over it, wailing endlessly in anguish. I won't even describe the obscene atrocities I've witnessed in Kindergarten Cop. And finally, I'd had enough. I switched the TV off and drew down the remote. I slumped down on the couch, shaking my head in my hands. I felt like I was going to vomit. Kate sat beside me and put her arms around me. I hugged her back. "Nick," she asked me, "what do you think it is?" I looked up thinking intently, considering various possible scenarios that might explain what was going on. Some kind of dimensional rift, a parallel universe, maybe even some kind of bio-warfare attack or chemical causing people to lose their minds. Maybe this whole thing was just a mass hallucination we were all experiencing. Nothing I could come up with seemed very plausible. "I don't have a clue, Kate," I confessed to her finally. "This isn't like anything I think anyone's ever experienced before." And Kate was silent for a long moment before she suggested a possibility of her own. What if this is the end of the world, Nick?" I looked at her. "You mean the end of the world in a biblical sense?" "Yes, Judgment Day." Inwardly, I rolled my eyes. We both were rational, college-educated people, and we both were atheists. I found the idea that this was some kind of divine punishment or Armageddon ridiculous, but I could tell she was upset, and so I didn't insult her by saying something snarky in response. I just shrugged. Who knows? "What are we going to do?" I thought about that. It was the first time I really stopped to consider the plight we found ourselves in. We were trapped in a house, cut off from the outside and with no way to reach help, and it seemed the world around us, if not reality itself, had gone nuts overnight. We're just gonna have to wait this thing out. Hope it changes for the better eventually. She wasn't happy with my answer. "That's it? That's the best you can come up with?" She sounded incredulous, and maybe even a little bit contemptuous. "Hey," I said, raising my voice a little, offended. "If you've got a better fucking idea, feel free to share it." And she lowered her head. "I'm sorry," she said softly. This whole thing has got me a little shaken up, I guess." "That's all right," I said. "Let's go check in on the others." We got up and left the living room, going into the kitchen. Annie was making breakfast for Chris and Adam, who were sitting at the table. All three of them were quiet and looked grim. "Okay," I said as we stepped through the doorway. "So listen up, guys. Obviously, we're all in kind of a bind here. But we're going to get through this, okay? We just have to keep our heads together and stick together, and we'll ride this mess out as a team." My little pep talk didn't seem to cheer anyone up that much, and they remained silent. And I continued. "So, our first order of business is to take inventory of our supplies. Luckily, Kate and Annie had done the weekly shopping just yesterday. We have plenty of food, and if we're careful, we can probably stretch it out for at least 2 weeks. What I was really worried about was water. Our water was supplied by the city. And considering that, for all we knew, civilization was breaking down outside, or already had, I wasn't sure how long our utilities would remain in operation. The next important thing is water. We need to fill as many clean containers as we can so we can have emergency supply of drinking water on hand in case we need it. We need to fill as many clean containers as we can so we can have an emergency supply of drinking water on hand in case we need it." Everyone was already freaked out enough, and I didn't want to panic them further by telling them our water line might shut down at any time. "Adam," I said, pointing to him, "why don't you go upstairs and fill the bathtub and sink with as much water as they can hold?" Yeah, sure, Uncle Nick. He got up and left the kitchen. What are we going to do if the power goes out? Chris asked me after Adam was out of earshot. I pointed to the same drawer I had taken a flashlight from earlier. We have about a dozen emergency candles in this drawer. And Chris nodded in disgust at this. Yeah, that's great if the power goes out in a thunderstorm at night and you don't need them the next morning. We don't know how long this thing could go on for. And if it's pitch darkness all the time and the power goes out and stays out, those candles might last us a day, maybe two. Then what? I looked at him, clenching my jaw a little. It was a good question, even if he had to ask it in a dickish way. There had always been some animosity between Chris and me, ever since high school, when I had been accepted into college on a scholarship, and he hadn't, and he had to go work for a trucking company instead. I think he resented me somewhat for my solidly middle-class life and cushy office job and pleasant suburban home, when he had to break his back, first at the loading docks, then as a long-haul driver, away from home and on the road for long stretches of time, cross-country. Then the layoff had happened. He and his wife and stepson had been evicted from their crappy trailer that they had been renting. And now he was out of work and didn't know what he was going to do to support his family. Then we'll break down the furniture and burn it in the living room fireplace for light. I answered him, my voice a little tight. We have flashlights we could use to get around the house, and if we're careful, we can make the batteries last for a couple of weeks. Yeah, Chris retorted. What if this goes on for months or years? Or what if it never? Annie, who had her back to her, slammed the plate she had been scooping a serving of scrambled eggs upon onto the counter hard, shattering it and causing Chris, Kate and me to jump. Will you stop it? She shouted angrily, turning to faces, and I saw tears welling in her eyes. Both of you, just stop it! She stormed out of the kitchen, shoving past Kate and me, and went down the front hall to the den, which was across from the living room, slamming the door behind her, and we could faintly hear her sobbing. A long, awkward moment of silence passed, and Chris sighed and slumped his shoulders, looking ashamed. He looked up at me. Sorry, bro. Guess I was losing my cool. Didn't mean to jump on you like that. Yeah, no harm done, I replied. No, I was being an asshole. I know you're doing the best to help us out. I'll go check on her, Kate said, heading towards the den. And Chris shook his head and sighed again. I just wish I knew what the fuck all of this. Well, he was interrupted by a sudden blood-curdling scream of horror that came from above us. We shot our heads up to the ceiling, our hearts jumping. The scream had come from the upstairs bathroom. Adam. Wow. Suddenly another one. Wow. Absolutely chest-pounding and twisted and chilling start to a series there. From my good friend CarlB1961 over on Reddit, no sleep. Stay tuned for part 3 and 4 tomorrow, guys. And of course, as ever, guys and girls, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. If you're an aspiring writer or would just like to have a crack at things like myself, then please do get in touch with me at the brand new contact email, which is as on screen. contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope everybody's had a fantastic weekend, whether at work or maybe you're relaxing in the back garden, soaking up the summer sun and summer vibes. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're enjoying it and you're getting stuck in. But above all, guys, remember, be safe. Not sorry.